Is this it? There we go. Sorry. Hey, hey. All right, sorry about that, y'all. Hey.
Hi.
Sorry about that. Kind of got and I was trying to type the topic as well to pin, which we'll see if that works. Yeah, there we go. All right. Hey, hey, Conrad, how are you?
I'm trying to make it. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks so much for making this happen. Um, how many months in quarantine?
Who knows? Who knows
And
what what are
who
they?
knows where we end, you know? I mean, I guess we can see the end coming, but, as far as things reopening, but when the pandemic will actually end, it seems like we're a ways out.
I think so too.
So glad to have you. We'll go ahead and get started while people are joining. With introductions, my name is Charlene Anderson. I am the founder and executive director for Starting With Today. Starting With Today is a nonprofit based in the Washington, D.C. area that provides mental health, career development, and financial education to adults in um, Southeast Washington, D.C. primarily, and Prince George's County within the Beltway. So this is right on par with our programming. We have with us the esteemed global leader,
Honestly.
the Conrad Woody, who is an expert executive search recruiter, also known as headhunting, and he helps people at the top companies get into prominent positions and help them find the right match. Is that correct? What I think you do?
It's for the most part, you got it. Yeah.
Okay, great. So before we get started, we want to make sure that you have ability to ask questions. So there's a Q&A button down there. Feel free to throw your questions in there just in case we don't see it on the thread. And we want to answer questions that you have as much as possible throughout this one as well. All right, so let's get started. I think what we know is the unemployment rate is ridiculous, right? And our communities are being hit even harder. On one end, a lot of the Black community are essential workers, and they're out and it's additional stress. And then another part is a lot of people are losing their jobs, and how do you begin to navigate this time? And companies are shifting. We know some companies are going to be downsizing and changing roles and adding roles and preparing people like what they can be doing to I really like what you do too about managing your career. Like it's not really up to a company, but it's up to you to manage your career. So let's get into it. So what can people be doing now to take inventory of their current careers, the fit, and is it a good time to pivot or explore? People should stay still, and what can that look like?
Yeah. I think it is. All things considering, a really great time. I think the first thing folks can do if they have the opportunity and the mental capacity to do so
That's
is
real.
just to pause and consider. You know,
Mm.
yourself really honest questions about how you feel, how what is your work environment providing to you? Is it giving you the correct challenges, the correct opportunities, and those kind of things first, and just give yourself a little grace to be able to, find your way to answer those questions. And then once you have those questions answered for yourself, then it's a really great opportunity to ask questions of others. And so, even though people are in very interesting spaces, given what we're dealing with. It's not a bad thing to start with the people that you know and go one degree beyond that. To just
Okay.
start. questions about, things that you want to do or someone's experience at a company or, how they did it, and collect that information consciously so you have the time to make the best decisions.
Do you think that, I think that's a great point you bring up about the conversation needs to both be internal and with circles and starting with people that you have a rapport with. And what about people who, may be a little bit for, do you feel like people should ask for an introduction? Should people do cold calls? What do you feel like that? What's the best practice for engaging with someone that you may not have a personal connection to?
Yeah. And so the first thing that I would advise is know what you want to ask.
That's true.
Okay. So a lot of times people will request a connection or request an introduction and then get said introduction and not know what to do, or expect the person that they've requested the time from to drive the conversation. Okay. So doing the pre-work of understanding what would I do, what would I ask if I got this opportunity to connect.
Right.
Yeah, I know, write it down, be very thoughtful.
Right.
Make sure you are using their time correctly. So, 15 minutes is probably the max. We're not asking for a half hour, an hour, but how can you strategically get what you need within that time frame? And then the final thing that no one tells you is, if you are granted an audience with these folks, ask them how you can be helpful. Now, you may not, not have resources, you may not have the connections, but be thoughtful. Try to answer the question before you get on the call to see how you can be of assistance to that person, because there's so much power in giving.
Awesome. I think that's a great point. As we know, the economic climate is uncertain, and we know that unemployment and careers go hand in hand with the economy. How are companies navigating this? Do you feel like companies are still hiring? Do you feel like companies are putting hiring on hold, or, abandoning ship altogether?
Yeah, so the answer to your question is both. Okay, there are a number of companies that are in downsizing mode, that are reducing workforce, cutting jobs to preserve capital to be able to operate for the rest of the year. But at the same time, there are 25, 26 companies that are hiring excess of 1,000 people.
Wow.
Really good hourly wage jobs. Even on the executive level, there really hasn't been a dip in people looking for great talent. So what does that mean for you and the communities that we serve here? And starting with today, it's, information gathering, right? Yeah. Ask yourself the question, how can I get the information that I need, whether it be online, whether it be talking to a friend, doing a cold call, asking for an introduction, to get myself closer to those opportunities that exist today, even though we're in a very tough economic market.
Awesome. And you brought up a good thing about there are companies that are still hiring in hourly wage jobs. Some of the ones I'm thinking about that comes, of course, the giant Amazon, and I've seen like a FedEx, like some other companies are still doing heavy marketing, saying that they need it. So I think that's a great opportunity for people to try to figure out what this looks like. I know a lot of people have had to pivot and to pick up a second job or pick up something in the interim to cover in the meantime. So definitely understandable. What changes should we expect to see on the other side of this pandemic, as far as hiring practice, and what will be the new normal? At one point, is he still there? Hello?
Here, I'm back.
Okay,
I'm
good.
back.
No problem.
I think we're all overusing our Wi-Fi these days.
Yes. Oh my gosh. It's so much on the draining. So I was asking, what changes should we expect to see on the other side of this pandemic as we enter a new normal? At one time, phone interviews were kind of, if someone was out the area and it was not a common practice. Do you feel like the hiring practice, the recruiting efforts will change?
They've already changed.
Mm-hmm.
People and companies and organizations are fully digital in their
Mm-hmm.
process. Hiring managers have gotten more comfortable with the idea that, hey, I'm going to do my best I can without actually meeting this person face to face. Candidates and people that are seeking jobs need to be more perceptive even now that you
Mm.
don't get to walk into the building,
Yeah.
and don't get to shake your boss's hand. And so that puts a little bit more responsibility on the seeker to make sure they're asking the best questions that match up with what they want to do. I think, Charlotte, the ink is not dry about what this is going to be post-COVID. Um,
Right.
Changes are sharp and they're happening now. So it's important
Mm-hmm.
for people that are, in job seeking mode is to do their best with the mental capacity they have, to take advantage of the moment if they can.
And I think it's really good that you keep talking about that too, and the mental capacity, because there's some days where like I'm on it, man. I'm like getting stuff done, and then the very next day it can be I can barely move off the couch, and to give myself grace for that, I think is really key. But then also kind of having some goals and some outline set for what I need to accomplish for survival for sure.
Mm-hmm. That was me yesterday, so I totally get it. So I live that, if you will.
Yeah, and I think it's important to talk about that. I think a lot of people feel the need, especially working from home now, to work more than they did if you have the privilege to work from home, to work more than probably we normally would, or be at least logged on and available longer. And I think it's really important to take those mental breaks and do those self checks often as well. And then I was just thinking too about a lot of the generation before us, where a lot of people would work one job 20, 30 years without even really questioning or taking any assessment about their own careers, and how important it is to do that self check. So, do you feel like we should be checking in often, like a couple times a year, once a quarter, to talk to your job and talk to your employer to see if this is still a nurturing environment, and what part is it on the job, and then what part is it like your responsibility?
Yeah, I think it's largely based your responsibility,
Right.
but the how is varies because every
Mm.
company is different, every employment situation is different. But one thing that doesn't change, Charlene, is starting with yourself.
Mm.
I counsel people to sort of take an inventory, every 6 months or so.
Mm.
Ask yourself those hard questions. Am I getting what I need from my work environment? Am I challenging? Am I growing in skill? Is this getting me to where, my potential North Star is? Or if you have a goal that what you do in your career, is what I'm doing today going to help me get there? Because doing that rebalance every 6 months helps you position yourself to acquire more information that can help you get to where you want to be. And obviously today with, people have families and children and they don't have as much mental space to do that.
Right.
Sometimes they might be in an environment that is unhealthy for them.
Mm.
Then they end up losing money in the long run, but they don't
Mm.
know it until they get there. And so that's really important.
That's such a good information. I think that taking inventory every 6 months is a good practice, and to kind of have uh, to not limit our dreaming. Right. I was listening to I'm just a fan, but a friend, Amber Cabral, who podcasts You Can Have Whatever You Want. But she was talking about the limiting we have even around wanting. So sometimes we want this, CEO position, or we want this head communications, or, head art director, whatever this position is. And we limit ourselves before we even get to the ask. You know what I'm saying? We don't ask ourselves of it, and then we don't have the courage to ask other people to facilitate and making that happen.
Mm-hmm. And I'm a fan of Amber's podcast too. The podcast is called How You Can Have Whatever You Want. And it's fitting because, to your point, especially within our communities and the communities that we serve are starting to today, Charlotte, we are not taught what career management is.
Very true.
Yeah, right. And, we're taught to put our head down, stay loyal, and all these other things that our parents did. But at the end of the day, when the market shifts under our feet and we can no longer compete. And
Yeah.
so, you know, there's one point in her podcast that she says, do it scared. And this
Yeah.
is actually a very scary time. But, you know, if you can find a way to pull that courageousness and make that call, or get the courageousness to go find that information that you want, that you may not want to hear,
Right.
it'll serve you better in the long run.
And you know what, Conrad, this is, you know, we're taking a slight left, but just in practicing that. And I remember when I had moved back to DC from Dallas, and I had the idea where I wanted to start this nonprofit, and I ended up talking to you very casually about it at a barbecue. CW barbecue is a big thing, a big deal. But it was like, I want to get into this nonprofit space, and what you end up doing was inviting me to places where other people in the nonprofit space was, and that connected me to Cal Bacon and to other people that were leaders in this space, and very comfortable in navigating nonprofits in DC. And, you know, within the next 2 years, you know, starting with Today Had Lunch. So I think even with that, it's like I had to convince myself to, you know, have even casually bring it up to a friend to say, this is the idea I have.
Mm-hmm. And I think that you're very, and I'm so happy to see where Starting With Today has come from, where you started with. I mean, it's amazing the impact that you've had over these, you know, past 5 years or so, you know. But to your point, you know, especially in our communities and the communities that we serve, we don't talk to each other enough. As men, especially as Black men, you know, we don't talk about our dreams, we don't talk about our goals, and we don't talk about money and things like that that really matter. And then, you know, use your network and your friends to be able to help support you in those goals and those dreams and all that other stuff. And so, you know, being a little bit vulnerable, which is a journey that I'm on, being more vulnerable personally, you know, can pay dividends, you know, if invested in the right people, if you will.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think so. I'm grateful for you as a friend that, you know, connected me. Then, of course, as a board member for Starting With Today. And but I think that piece is so important, and it keeps it. It's not a one-time thing either. It's like you have to keep asking the right questions and keep putting yourself out there for no's, and no's happen a lot. I think a lot of people only see the yeses and praise the yeses. Well, there are a lot of no's on the way, and you just take them with stride and you keep going towards your goals. One of the things that comes up a lot in our workshops is resume and resume building, and we have this philosophy where we want our resumes to be tell our stories, very a storytelling tool, and not just this is what I did tool. And we do that a lot of ways where we navigate where you want to go and connect the skills that you've already acquired to the position that you want. And we can go in depth about that at another time. But I think it's important to say, hey, what for people who are experiencing gaps or downsizing or having to pick up a second job or at this time, what should people do if there is a gap in their employment due to this pandemic to tell that story?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the best thing, and there's always the best policy, Charlotte, is to be honest.
Yeah.
And as you're outlining your career narrative, which is what I like to call it, your resume, because that's what it really is. It's a
career narrative.
Which rings a little bit different than this is just what I did. You know, it's up to you and whatever you feel comfortable with, but you can easily say at the very end of a sentence to say, you know, job eliminated due to COVID-19. It's very easy. So being honest and transparent is always the best way to go.
Awesome. And it doesn't have to be a long thing either. I think what you just said was very short and to the point, and it gives enough clarity where it's like, okay, we get that, you know. I think a lot of times we overthink that. How should we be using this time to improve our resumes, to revisit our career narratives? This is what we will give it a tagline for. And any tips around what we should be doing to improve our resumes?
Yeah, and I think this is just every time people should think about this. You know, first things, it only takes about 30 minutes a year to keep your resume updated.
Right.
We've been on this live for about 30 minutes. So
Right.
there for the fam that said they don't have time to update their resume. Let's put it out there in these streets. All right. So that's number one. Number two, you know, when you're arranging your career narrative, what's really important is to summarize what you do at scale, right? So 1 to 2 sentences, this is what I do. And then with the rest of the content under your specific job, talk about how you've added value. You know, talk about how you've quantified value, or you took leadership on a project, or you were, you know, if you were in construction and you decided to, you know, bring a bunch of guys that help create this thing that got the deal done faster, you know, rather than I just do construction, right? So being able to use words and use language to really highlight how you added value in concert with describing what you do in a clear, concise fashion is something that will give you a lot to do on your resume, because you have to do it at every job and be very thoughtful. And understanding that it's a living and breathing document.
Yes.
And the one thing that you don't want to risk is that you don't pay attention to your career narrative, that you forgot some of the great things that you've done, because no one else can remember it for you.
That's so true. And one of my best practices, especially when I was working for other organizations, was to keep an Excel document or a Google sheet with my accomplishments. And so again, it's not tasks, but it's accomplishments that and wins for the company and for my teams that we had came up with, that we had done at that time. So it helped not only with like new positions and building my confidence as a leader and as knowing my value, but also with performance evaluations, asking for raises, asking for bonus, and having that concrete information there that, you know, it's indisputable that this is the value that I bring to teams.
Well, and I just want to take a second to really digest what you said, because it really leads into something else very critical. If you're diligent about recording what you do, it's easier to talk about yourself.
It is.
Because, be honest, you know, in our communities and the people that surround us, again, I go back to put your head down, don't be braggadocious, all the other stuff that they told us, which mostly is not true. But how you talk about yourself to people is really critical, because sometimes they can say, oh, I'm a, you know, a dentist, or, you know, I work in retail, but you're a manager, you manage 14 people, you know what I mean? And,
Right.
or you're a consultant, that you work in this sort of division and that you work with these clients.
Right.
It makes a difference about how you present yourself to the world should you get an opportunity to compete for a role.
Absolutely. And I think too, it starts with how we talk to ourselves. And I know in a lot of our workshops, we talk to people who work the front lines of fast food places and grocery stores, and they don't realize all the people management they're doing. They don't realize all the multitasking they're doing. They're handling project management, you know, conflict resolution, and how we begin to give them language for the skills that they have that are transferable and can be built upon, and that we are learners, and learning is ongoing at any position, at any level, well, it should be, and to build that confidence from there.
I always say that leadership and learning is synonymous. And if you're not learning, you're losing money.
Wow. That's good. That's good. And you know, some companies, they have this thing, they're getting back to like incentivizing learning for employees. But again, it goes back to like, this is your career. I know before I left my job to go full time for starting with today, one of the things I would do during my lunch break, I would close my office door, I would turn the lights off, and I would listen to TED Talks that were inspirational, that were around business development, around the nonprofit sector. And that's how I spent my hour feeding myself, you know, physically, but also feeding myself mentally, and getting prepared for the work ahead. And I think that's important, finding that time. And I think at one point when I used to ride the metro, they used to be my time to read and to do some self-reflection. I think we have to find that time, whether it's in the shower or, you know, 5 minutes going outside for a walk, but we owe it to ourselves.
And to put a fine point on it, Charlene, it's okay to be loyal to your employer, but you need to be loyal to you, Inc.
You Inc. You Incorporated, for sure, for sure. So let's switch a little bit towards LinkedIn and how we can maximize that for LinkedIn. We recently, maybe 2 years ago, we did our first LinkedIn training. We've done it several times since then, but my nutshell about LinkedIn, I said it's Facebook for careers, right? So storytelling for careers, the way that we use Facebook for our, friends and family storytelling. So what are your thoughts about LinkedIn and how can we maximize that?
Yeah. So I understand where you're coming from for Facebook for careers, but that's probably only about 1% of what
True.
the product is for. So let's talk about it, like,
Nice.
be straight up. LinkedIn is the most underutilized contact and brand management tool in all of technology. The whole thing. What we think about, or what people have convinced us to think, is I go to LinkedIn when I need a job. But there are so many people in this world, so many people that are close to you, or your first or second degree, that you went to school with, or you went to church with, whatever it is. The question is, how can you communicate what you're doing with them in one place? And so being able to not only have your career narrative be clear and concise and crisp about what you do and what you add value, we talked about on the resume, some of your interests outside of work, your volunteerism, your philanthropy, and then obviously being involved in conversations of mutual interest. And so there are a lot of ways to be able to use this platform to get to know people, but also for people to get to know you.
Right.
I do a test when I'm counseling people. Is I ask them, if you pick up your phone, how many people on average do you call per year? And some people say, hey, I have 400 contacts, I have 1,000 contacts, I have 100 contacts. But usually the number is less than 10%.
Absolutely.
How many you pick up the phone and actually call? So what's the way to mitigate that? Is putting it on LinkedIn and keeping your connections warm that way, and being proactive and reaching out and telling people what you're doing, and also reaching out to be helpful. Is a great way to spend your time on the platform.
Absolutely. And I think you were one of the first people I heard preach about LinkedIn and like the importance of it at the time. A lot of people wasn't putting their resume out there. It's very taboo. And, I really applaud the visionaries of LinkedIn for pushing it when it seemed like, what's the purpose of it? And I think a great tip that I had early on was I went to a couple profiles that I like, yours included, and looked at how you formatted it, what stories you were telling, and shape that for my narrative. So that's, you don't necessarily have a template for LinkedIn, but there are definitely people that you can follow in your career fields, in your industry, that are maximizing LinkedIn and begin to create your own ecosystem. And I think it's really important because a lot of times you have people in your network that you consider friends and you don't know what, like, I don't work with you, so I don't know what projects you're working on or what big wins you have. I don't know what, I have an idea, a big umbrella, but until you get to know some of the skills that people are actually bringing to the table, then it helps you navigate that better. Or if you see a job over here, you have people in mind. If you need a position filled or project help, then you know who to reach out to. I think has been a lifesaver for me, both in the employment section, but also with starting with today and helping find people to help push our mission forward.
Absolutely, I agree.
So how can we leverage LinkedIn to grow our brands, our personal brands? And I hate the word personal brand, but for lack of a better word, because I feel like we're human first, but how can we bring our value to LinkedIn and leverage that more?
Yeah, and just to point out, we're taught to hate the word personal brand. So you have to understand, you have to unlearn that.
Okay.
It's very important. Everybody does it. And you owe it to yourself to maximize your personal brand. And so let's talk about how we use the platform to do that. In addition to all of the things that we talked about before with the, your career narrative content and people that you're following and engaging, be able to think strategically to share content that's about you. So, for example, I'm very active on LinkedIn now, especially during COVID, but before then I was much more active. Um, I was at an arts event, and I posted a little bit about, if my mom didn't put me in front of the piano at six years old, I wouldn't be here. It got like 30,000 views, but that's sharing a little bit of me with the communities that I'm connected with, right? Or, hey, I'm so proud to be a board member of Starting With Today. This is what is important to me. Or I'm proud to be a board member of Step Africa. This is what's important to me. Or you're volunteering with your church, or you're volunteering with, underserved youth in a school, and this is how I bring change to the community. Just being able to episodically, it's not a heavy lift, maybe 4 to 5 times per year. It's not a lot of work. But if there's something that you're doing that's meaningful, that you want people to know about it, capture it in a picture and talk a little bit about it, or connect with people that are doing that work. And then on the execution side, reach out to people that you want to engage with. Now, you have to be honest. And to your point earlier in the conversation, you got to be comfortable with no, and you got to be comfortable with non-answer. It's kind of like dating. It's like you'll holler at her, and sometimes you holler back. Sometimes you won't, but you got to keep going anyway. But the value in that is that you are in nonprofit and you're in a service model. Just say that, hey, by the way, here's a live that I did on career management. We're both a nonprofit. Here you go. It's not about if that person answers or if that person responds or wants to get coffee with you. It's just being able to share what you're doing with other people. Because guess what? You run into the airport, when airports open up, by the way, a year from now, and they'll say, you know what, Charlotte, you did send me that information. You did invite me to the Starting With Today fundraiser. You did invite me to the 5K for leukemia when we're ever to do those things again. And so you're building a digital narrative about how you're connecting people over a long period of time. And that's where the personal brand value lies.
You know what? It's so great you brought that up, because I think a lot of people want this quick, instant satisfaction. We want it in our dating lives. We want it definitely professional. But there are people who told me no, the first year Starting With Today, that seek me out in year 6, right? And so how consistent are you with it? And how are you going to let, I mean, there are 1,000 no's for every yes, and you can't really spend time on those no's, but you can invest in those yes to create more wins, and the right opportunities will come, present themselves over and over again.
I agree.
All right, so we have some questions. If you have questions, let us know and put them in the Q&A box so we can see them. If we missed anyone else, then we'll try to go through the thread. If your role has expanded due to COVID-19, is it reasonable to ask for a raise or a bonus? I say it.
That is a wonderful question. Let me take
great question.
Think about that. That's a great question.
Thank you for that, official Isha. Official Isha.
I want to give an honest answer, and I'm going to do my best. So please give me grace. I'm going to do my best. I think everybody has expectations, especially employers, that their employees are going to give it the best they can and the best they have under these extreme mental circumstances.
Right.
And also, thinking about from the employer side, how they have to manage cash for reduced sales and all these other things, right? I would think about how you treat people during COVID. And then when you feel we're out of it, which is not going to be a long time, could be a strategy to revisit compensation. But I would focus in the moment on your performance to the best you can, and how you're treating people and how you're adding value to people consistently as much as you can during this time. And then maybe next year, when things are feeling a little bit more normal, you may have built up enough equity to revisit a compensation conversation internally.
I think it's twofold too, and I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think it kind of goes back to this career narrative, right? So that would be the first thing I added, like, to my career narrative. During a pandemic, I absorbed these roles, and I was
Yeah.
able to maintain this level of effectiveness even during these stressful times, to make sure the company, was able to meet the mission and serve the people, or whatever their mission is. And then leverage that at your review or your one-on-ones, and whenever you're doing your performance evaluations. But also, if they say no, then you have enough, of your career narrative to look for other positions as well. And a lot of times, currently we didn't talk about that. A lot of times, your bonus at a job, or your raise at a job, is significantly less than what you can do looking for a new position. And maybe we can talk about that. Like, what's the difference between, staying and maybe getting that COLA increase, that's a cost of living increase, or a merit bonus that may be 5%, versus looking for a job that can increase your income for 20%.
Yeah, I always tell people it's prudent to be thoughtful to interview once a year, because it's
Mm-hmm.
not I'm unhappy in my role. It's more about what is the market yielding right now.
Wow, that's great advice.
And to be honest, and this is nothing against our employers, but they're not going to tell us that you're worth $20,000 more somewhere else. And so it's scary, and it's not easy, but you owe it to yourself to go out and get that information. Okay. And so let's talk about money. Like, depending where you are and what kind of job you're in, let's just say that you're in a company, depending on the employee band, you're only going to make so much unless it's a significant jump.
Yep.
Because they'll keep you there as long as you'll let them.
Absolutely.
That's just the honest to God's truth. And this is why I counseled earlier on in the conversation about check in with yourself every 6 months, because if you don't, you can get into a situation where you're hoping for a promotion.
Absolutely.
And you're hoping somebody's going to give you more money, and you're hoping your manager is going to give you more responsibility so you can make more money. And that is a really unfortunate place to be in, because if you know you can give more and you're performing at a good level, I mean, above expectations, because that's
right.
what, and you're doing the right things from a personal brand perspective, there could be opportunity elsewhere.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's so important, especially for women, Black women, where we have been told to absorb these extra roles, and we do it because it comes easier to us than probably we're just being conditioned to do it, and I think we have to take inventory of that. And I think also when you're talking about, I think when you mentioned it first, I was just thinking, hey, how does this career fit for me now? Is it working for me now? But not necessarily how does it fit in my lifestyle, right? Am I still stressed about bills? Am I exhausted on my commute? And do I have a good life balance? And I think those are more holistic questions that I think we forget to ask. Like, am I happy? And does this job fit into that?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I'll be honest, women of color get it the worst.
Yeah, absolutely.
Out of everyone in the entire workforce. And that is not to say that there's not a way out from that, or that it's just that I really counsel my friends that are women of color to be, courageous as best you can about getting that information.
Right.
If you're in healthcare, or if you're in tech, or if you're in finance, and you're not getting what you want, what's the next step to get the information to get you closer to what you want? Because at the end of the day, you're responsible for your career.
And you know what? And what a woman had told me a while back, a Black woman had told me a while back, she's phenomenal, but she was like, you think you're just taking this small increase now, or taking this hit now with your finances, but what does that trickle effect look like 10 years, 20 years? How much money have you left on the table? And that goes to like how you take care of your family, what trips and vacations and lifestyle you're able to live due to you waiting for someone to give you your value instead of seeking that out. and being relentless about that. And I think relentless is the right word for Black women, because it's a lot of no's again, and how you begin to navigate that space to say, hey, I know I need this amount of income. This is part of my strategy for building generational wealth. So my children don't have the same financial burden that I have.
Well, it goes back to our earlier 2 points: is courageousness about going to find the information, which is interviewing for another job.
Right.
Because if you interview for another job and you get an offer of employment, you see what that company values you at. Companies value you at. Okay. That's information. Now, you don't have to take this offer. It's fine.
Right.
But now you know that this company has assigned a dollar value on what your skill set brings versus what you're being paid today.
Right.
And then moreover, this goes to the vulnerability about talking to each other, right? We, in our communities, just don't talk about money at all. We're scared to tell somebody what we make. We're scared to tell somebody how we got to where we are from a compensation perspective, because we were taught that's not the things that you share. Now, am I telling you go blab that on Facebook? Absolutely not. 2 to 3 really good friends and a mentor. You have to be courageous in asking those questions like, hey, I'm making $60,000 and I've been doing this for 10 years. What does that mean for me?
Right.
You're where I want to be. You don't have to tell me what you make, mentor, but if you were at my shoes,
what would you do?
Would I be from a compensation perspective? Oh, I'm supposed to be there. Okay. How do I get to 100? Or how do I get to 150, right? And then again, it's about collecting that information and then using that information proactively to get the career that you want.
Absolutely. And I think, again, we're just saying that this is an ongoing practice. I think the thing you said about interviewing once a year too, it made me think about that interviewing is a muscle, right? So if you only interview when you're in desperate times, it's going to show. And you're going to be weak in interviewing. And interviewing is a skill that can be practiced in the home, just like any other thing. It's not a magic that you just pray about and boom, you're going to be good at the interview. But it's something that you have to practice as well to build that muscle.
And for my women here on the thread, one of my favorite stories is I contacted a woman. This was 5 or 6 years ago. Contacted women for roles. She was perfect for it. I had been watching her for a few years. And picked up the phone. Hey, listen, hi, I'm Conrad. This is what I do. I would love to talk to you about this job. Oh, no, I'm really happy. My company is going to promote me to vice president. And I was like, well, this is a little bit different than what you do, but I would really encourage you to, take a look at this. And I was like, well, what do you think? She's like, well, let me think about it. She calls me back. She's like, I don't think I'm going to go for it. Well, I was like, well, let me do this. Tell me a little bit about your working. And then, money's not everything, but let me see if we're in the ballpark here. She was like, well, I'm making 130 and I'm going to get a promotion to 150 and be an SVP. I was like, well, I think it would be in your interest to kind of learn a little bit about this. And she didn't. 2 weeks later, I see in Politico that she's been promoted to senior vice president and all that. Meanwhile, my job paid $440. And so the fact that she didn't have the courageousness to look and listen, again, money's not everything, but
right.
What I mean about learning that she was so tethered to what her employer was telling her that she didn't know that her value was $300,000 more than she was making today.
That's insane. That's insane. And even just kind of go back to like what we had kind of mentioned before about Amber's podcast, the one I had listened to just today, was like, being okay to ask that, because she probably didn't even have the mindset to think, up worth, 400K plus, and so we have to begin to yes, tell our stories, but also really begins to look at those positions. And one of the things that I do a lot in our workshops is look at these key positions and see what boxes you already check off, and look at the range for those jobs. And if there are skill gaps or experience gaps, then what can we do to like fill in those gaps? And yeah, I think that begins to completely change the narrative. Before we begin to I saw some questions in the thing, so we won't have to go all the way back. If you have questions, can you leave them in the Q&A button? I'll try to go through. Marcus asked, what are some questions to consider when talking to executives within your company to help reframe how they see your contributions and career aspirations?
Well, it's hard to control someone else's perception.
Mm.
That's something that I failed miserably at in my last job. Like I tried to, I mean, because I was good, right? And I know I was the best on the team, but I couldn't change the opinion of somebody that didn't want to see my power. So that's number one. Number two is doing it through your work. And if you're killing it, people will hear about you, but also are you doing things outside of your scope to be seen? You know, I always tell people you can do your job very well for 10 years and be mediocre.
Mm.
But people don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
What do you mean I'm good at my job? Well, you've just been doing the same thing over and over again for 10 years. So
Right,
actually,
right.
you're mediocre and you're behind the eight ball. And so with respect to managing your relationships internally, it's about, you know, killing it, doing good work, being helpful, and picking up things outside of your scope that you can get that visibility. And then once you're there, you can make the ask. And then if they do not acquiesce, you know, you have your answer. I mean, you have the information to know that, hey, this is not going to be what I want it to be, but it's not the end of me.
That's so real. Yeah, and again, I guess it goes back to that career narrative as well, and we get to tell what the story is going to be. We get to shape the story. We're not bypassers in that. So real quick, if you still have questions, leave them there. But I couldn't help but think about this week, that the trauma that we have endured as Black people in this country, right? And I saw a couple of tweets around some Black men and some Black people feeling some reprieve during this quarantine, that they at least don't have to go into a workspace where people aren't empathetic to the weight of seeing Black bodies killed and attacked in the workplace. And I just wanted to get your thoughts around what do you feel companies' responsibility? We have Franklin Templeton was Amy Cooper's employer, and they did a public statement that said that effective immediately, you know, this person has been terminated and they will not tolerate racism of any kind at Franklin Templeton. And even though this incident happened off hours, and she was still terminated, and I think this very public approach was celebrated. But then also thinking about a lot of Black women have worked with Amy Cooper, right? Or a lot of Black people have worked with these people who share these ideas and will interfere with the career progress. What do you feel corporations, companies' response should be to social justice, or to act like we saw with Amy Cooper, or do you feel like they have a responsibility at all?
Well, I think it's, you know, they do have a responsibility, but I think ultimately it's kind of up to you to feel it. You know, if you feel taken care of, if you feel included, if you feel like your spaces are being respected, then great. If not, not to say that you need to bail, but at the same time, you have the information that you need to make the best decision. Maybe the place that you stay for 10 years.
That's so true.
Maybe it's a place that you stay for 3 or 4 years. And then that goes back to asking the questions, right? And being courageous. And not to say I don't applaud Franklin Templeton's swift action, but that's kind of who she is. And how many people in the company that have been having those behaviors and they just haven't maybe addressed it. Now, is that the case? Have no idea. Not saying it is, not saying it isn't, but as someone that, you know, counsels people on these things, be very aware and ask questions around it. And how were you treated? And why do you think you were treated that way? You know, was it your performance, or was it someone else, or was it Amy Cooper? And so this, you know, relentless pursuit for information to the best that you can while under this mental stress is something I counsel people to do. So if you know you want to work for Amazon, if you know you want to work for Google or something like that, find a way to talk to people that are already there, to be able to understand their experience, but also shape what you think if you want to pursue something at that company.
That's so true. And I think feeling emotionally safe, I saw a couple Black executive friends that were talking about in their Zoom meetings that they created some space for um, create some time for people to talk about how they were affected by it instead of just as, going to the agenda business as usual, without the burden. I think that is, I don't know. It's weighty, to have to put on a face like nothing's happening. But I think it's important to go back, like, what are your values? And if feeling, I think we throw out diversity inclusion a lot until there's time to actually be inclusive, right? And so, how do we create these spaces that are actually inclusive, and sometimes we have to be our own agents for that as well.
Absolutely.
All right. I don't have any other questions. Do y'all have any more questions? Do you have any final notes, Conrad?
Well, one thing I would say before we shut it down, you know, if you have a question, ask it, because, the communities that we serve, we don't talk about this stuff enough at scale.
That's real.
And number two, you never know who's going to learn from your question. So it's really important to, that no question is out of bounds.
That's so true. So true. And I think too, when you talk about that, and a lot of times of course, you don't know who's in the room and who can connect the dots, and just even getting in the practice of asking and getting into that space. But yeah, and then having this access, right? Like, I can't afford you. So to get this access, I think it's a really good gift. Have you noticed a decline in recruitment within the government international affairs space since, at larger companies, I'm sorry, it's hard to read over his text shirt, as a result of limited travel? Okay.
No. Most of the time people are doing it locally. So my company's based in the UK, and there's a lot going on in GR and communications and public affairs over there. They're just not, traveling to China every 2 times. So in that market, it's not slowing down, because at the end of the day, COVID-19 is a people problem, and how you interact with the government is how you deal with your people, and your people deliver your sales, and your people deliver your value. So the people in that market are front and center right now. So no, I haven't seen a decline, but I see people being much more critical about what they want.
Can you expand on that?
Well, I mean, this goes for everything, right? This not just goes for the areas where I recruit, but it's, because employers don't have the ability to meet you, they're handicapped in some ways, your references are more important, And, I would think twice before you put the reference of your condo board president as someone that is a professional reference. That's not, or your pastor. Like, I've seen it all. Like, literally, I've seen it all. Why is your pastor here? We know your pastor's going to say good things about you. That's not it. So, just understand the bar for hiring has increased because employers are limited in what they can do to acquire, if you will.
Awesome. Marcus asked how you can support Starting With Today. One is, sharing content, following us, encouraging people to follow us. One is donate. You can donate at startingtoday.org. And you can volunteer as well, and shoot me an email at info@startingwithtoday.org. That email is also in our profile. And we share talents, and we all have something to give. So we're very community-based in how we can share the resources that we have within us to build a greater collective in our communities. Thank you for that question, though.
As a board member, I would encourage, if you have it to give monthly, because the work that she is doing is absolutely fantastic. And so we need resources to be able to continue to deliver our work. And if you have in your heart, we would love our monthly givers.
Absolutely. And that information is on the website as well. There's a question that says, I have one in the box. Okay. Advice for women coming to the table in regards to counter offers. Numbers show more men are comfortable countering. So would love to hear how you encourage women to do the same. Great question. Thank you so much.
So it's all in your pre-work, right? So what people don't understand about offer negotiations is that it's literally the only time in the whole process.
No, it's paused.
Other time until somebody puts a piece of paper in front of you.
Hopefully it comes
So
back.
if you haven't done the pre-work before the paper, you put yourself at a disadvantage. And what is the pre-work? What have we talked about this entire live? Go get the information. Hey, I'm interviewing with Deloitte. Hey, I'm interviewing with Lockheed Martin or whoever. You know, I'm going out for an analyst position. How much do they pay? Or I see that your friend worked at Lockheed Martin. Would you be able to connect me with them? And so talk about their experience and talk about how much they pay. You know, or this, that, and the third. And so if you come into it with that information, it takes a little bit of the edge off because you have that information in your mind about comparable compensation data, right? And so they try to lowball you, just say they try to give you 5,000 more than you're making your current job. Your goal is to respond quickly. And then if they take the time, it's respond quickly and say less. Whoever says the fewest words wins. And it's important that you got to be willing to walk away. And so when you're ready to counter, you have to know what to ask for and why. And if they come back with something that's acceptable, great. If they said, hey, we can't do it, you got to know when to walk away, because I guarantee you they don't want to start over.
Oh, that's so real, because at the point of negotiation, it's so real. In my experience, we really are trying to get this job filled at that point. And I think, too, we talk about, and I think we should put more emphasis on compensation, like the actual number, but then also the package as well, and what that needs to look like for your lifestyle that you aspire to have.
Absolutely.
I think I saw one more. So okay, she asked that. All right, I think that's all the questions that I saw. This has been so helpful and encouraging. I hope you all got something out of it. Feel free to let me know if y'all have any questions. Conrad, where can they find you?
You can find me at CWoodyJR on all platforms, and you can connect with me on LinkedIn at Conrad Woody.
It's gonna be hard to connect with you on connect.
just be patient. I have a lot of stuff going on up there right now. So
always, and of course, you can follow Starting With Today if you're not already doing it at Starting With Today. And then we're on Twitter as Starting W Today, and we're on Facebook under Starting With Today as well. So share, come back. We got more coming up, and we'll keep you posted right here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Charlene.
Y'all have a good one. Y'all be safe out there.
Y'all be safe.